All right, so among the new information revealed in Thursday's January the 6th hearing is the sheer scale of planning among extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers in the lead up to the insurrection. In fact, in video that was shown on Thursday, a lawyer for the committee revealed that online coordination to descend on the Capitol actually began on December 19th, immediately after President Trump tweeted out about a big protest in D.C., adding, "Be there, will be wild." He said it was viewed as a call to arms. In fact, he revealed that the Proud Boys created a self-described Ministry of Self-Defense leadership chat to discuss a command structure for January the 6th. And the Oath Keepers created quick reaction forces to be on standby with weapons in case President Trump invoked the Insurrection Act. One of the witnesses to testify was a documentary filmmaker, this guy named Nick Quested. He filmed this meeting between Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio and Oath Keepers leader Stuart Rhodes the night before the insurrection. And though Quested did not capture all the audio of what the two spoke about, the Department of Justice says the pair did reference the Capitol. Both have since pleaded not guilty to seditious conspiracy charges related to the Capitol attack. Quested also revealed that when he met up with the Proud Boy again on the morning of the insurrection, he realized they weren't there for Trump's speech.
They were starting to walk down the mall, easterly direction towards the Capitol. There was a large contingent, more than I had expected. And I was confused to a certain extent why we were walking away from the president's speech, because that's what I felt we were there to cover. I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. And for anyone who didn't understand how violent that event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it. I heard incredibly aggressive chanting, and I subsequently shared that footage with the authorities.
We saw new and at times disturbing images of that violent insurrection. The crowd that breached the Capitol, with Proud Boys and Oath Keepers among them, searched for Nancy Pelosi. They chanted, "Hang Mike Pence." This while the vice president was left to call for the National Guard down, and Republican lawmakers made repeated calls to the White House. It took 187 minutes before Trump finally tweeted a video telling those rioters that he loved them and to go home, which raises another important question. What exactly was Trump doing in those 187 minutes? Well, according to the hearing Thursday, he wasn't doing anything to protect or save his vice president.
And aware of the rioters' chants to hang Mike Pence, the president responded with this sentiment, quote, "Maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence, quote, deserves it."
All right, let's bring back our panel. Former U.S. Attorney Barbara McQuade, Danielle Moody, host of the Woke AF Democracy-ish podcasts, and Lincoln Project advisor Tara Setmeyer. She should be back with us in just a moment. I think we lost her connection. Barbara, let me start with you. Nick Quested revealed that before Trump even began speaking at the Save America rally on January the 6th, members of the Proud Boys were already making their way to the Capitol. Hundreds of them, he said. What does that tell you about the level of coordination and the intention of these organizations on that day?
Yeah, that was a new fact to me as well, Ayman. It was not one I had appreciated before. And it does suggest, doesn't prove, but it does suggest that there was concerted activity, conspiracy, planning between the Trump campaign and these two groups, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. The other new fact to me was the number, 250 to 300. We know from those indictments that there was a handful of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers who participated in these stacks and breached the Capitol. I had no idea that they were talking about those kinds of numbers, 250 to 300 of them. And so one possibility is because they didn't go to the speech, it wasn't until about noon that Donald Trump said, we're going to march to the Capitol, and the crowd went down there. And, from earlier appearances, got a little unruly, got a little out of hand, and entered the Capitol because of their rage. What this could be instead is 250 to 300 people went there and breached the Capitol. They knocked down the doors so that the mob could follow them in, which would increase the likelihood that that vote would be stopped. I still would want to hear more direct evidence that this was a plan, and it could be that that evidence is established. We know that at least 3 members of these militia groups have pleaded guilty and are cooperating, including a man named Joshua James, who was videoed with Roger Stone on January 5th and January 6th. So if there was a plan between the Willard Hotel war room of the Trump campaign and these militia groups, that would be a really explosive fact. So I think what we have right now is a potential inference and a suggestion that would cause me to want to look a little further to find out whether this was a plan.
And Danielle, meanwhile, back at the White House, Trump was busy not doing much of anything, quite honestly. It seems for 187 minutes, according to his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, who said this, this is testimony from the Joint's chief chair, General Mark Milley. Watch.
He said, we have to kill the narrative that the vice president is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative that that the president is still in charge and that things are steady or stable or what's that thing. I immediately interpret that as politics, politics, politics. Red flag for me personally, no action, but I remember it distinctly.
A mob descends on the Capitol, and it's all politics, politics, politics coming from the White House. Make sure Trump still looks like he's in charge. And meanwhile, it was Mike Pence telling General Milley to send in the National Guard to protect the Capitol and all the politicians that were up there on Capitol Hill bracing for an attack. Where is the accountability for the lack of action from the White House during those 187 minutes?
But here's the thing, Ayman. Donald Trump was in charge. He just wasn't in charge of the White House. He was in charge of this insurrection. And so when we're looking at the 187 minutes, and we have to remember that when we were introduced to the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, where was that? That was during the campaign when Donald Trump on stage with then candidate Joe Biden said to them, stand back and stand by. Right? So these are things that we know to be true. No, I am not a lawyer, but I have to tell you that if this Department of Justice does not act on the information that we have at hand, our democracy is done. Right? You don't move on from this. For 187 minutes, while a mob was chanting to hang the Vice President of the United States, while members of Congress are being evacuated, Donald Trump was doing something, but he wasn't doing it for the American people. I believe that he was acting in coordination with the people that he told to stand back and stand by. We have got to continue to connect these dots. This is not an accident. This was not something that just happened out of thin air or it was passion and these people were caught up. It was a coordinated act. It was a coordinated group that had Donald Trump, their leader, in charge of what it was that they were doing.
So, Tara, one of the things I was just talking to Barbara about was the role the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys played in this and a little bit of the evidence that emerged yesterday about the possibility that there was coordination beforehand. But it raises a question as to whether there was a link between the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and somebody at the White House. And that's where, the focus of Roger Stone comes in here, because he's a close Trump ally. He was not mentioned yesterday, but what questions remain for you about his involvement in the attempt to overturn the election? Where does he sit in the nexus that links what the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers were doing on the day or in the weeks before the insurrection and the White House on that day and in the weeks before the insurrection?
Oh, he's right in the middle of all of it. And I think that there has to be a Department of Justice investigation looking into this. I mean, they've already charged them with a bunch of them with seditious conspiracy. They had to have dots connected for all of that. So I think there's more to come for us to find out on that. I also know that there were others who had Proud Boys as their personal security besides Roger Stone. There were others at some of these other rallies as well, allies of the White House. And then you also have that war room at the Willard. Who was present there? Giuliani was there. You had Steve Bannon, some of these other cast of characters that all have direct links to the White House. And I just want to say something else about this. The intelligence community, the FBI, the DHS came out earlier this week and talked about this rise in white supremacist and right-wing extremism, and how they're using social media as a recruitment tool, and how their recruitment tools, like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and others, that it resembles ISIS, and how savvy ISIS was with using social media as a recruitment tool. We just saw the tip of the iceberg during this hearing yesterday on the communication between these groups on Telegram and other social media platforms, and how they plotted and planned here. They're learning this from terrorist organizations, and they're adapting. This is something the American people need to be fully made aware of, and they understand the seriousness of what these people were doing. So I think that's something that we're going to hear more about, and I think the Justice Department definitely has their eye on it.